Right guys, welcome to Jersey Airport and for the introduction on the Cirrus SR22. I thought I'd give you an introduction to the aircraft that's is going to take part in the tabletop. I think the best way that we learn from the fire service is getting as much information on the aircraft as possible rather than just being throwing in at the deep end, okay? So this is the benefit of what I can do here, okay? So, Cirrus SR22 started off as the Cirrus SR20, then became really, really popular. Cirrus then made a load of improvements to the aircraft, and the SR22 then came around, the G5, and this is pretty much the stablemate that we see down the Aero Club coming in for joyriding and also down at Gamma, okay? They have just brought out the G7. It is worth noting, or at least having a look into the G7, especially the technology that's now on board. The G7 that's just come out looks like a Cirrus, has some technology on board that basically means that if a pilot had some sort of a problem, i.e. a medical issue, a crew member or a passenger can press a button and the aircraft will auto land, taking into consideration the computer on board will look at the right aircraft to land, the right airport to land at, whether the airport's long enough, if it can handle a Cirrus, and it will basically turn the aircraft to that airport and self-land it without anybody having any sort of touch on any of the controls, which is really interesting. But we may need to know that from a fire service point of view, on the basis that the aircraft, when it lands, nobody's in control of that aircraft. It shuts the aircraft down and everything, but that is what is coming, okay? Another thing we need to know about these aircraft is the CAP system, or the BRS system, which we know is synonymous across this aircraft, which I'll go into in a little bit. The benefit of me being able to do it on this is we're never really able to get up close and personal to aircraft, where I can do everything with this aircraft here in front of me, like what I would be able to in real life, okay? So I'm just going to get rid of some of this, just so we can have a look at it. So the Cirrus SR22, purely avgas from a fire service point of view. Jet A1, if we look at turboprops, not all, but most aircraft will have a really big exhaust that comes out the side or down below, and that's synonymous with a turboprop. This is purely avgas, okay? 8 meters long, 12 meter wingspan, or 11.7. Maximum weight is about 1,630 kilograms, more than adequate for the iron tyre. In both the wings, it houses 348 litres in total, and cruises about 183 knots, which is 200 odd miles per hour. Has a range of 1,000 nautical miles, and this aircraft is known as a glass cockpit, which is what I'll show you on the inside in a little bit, okay? So from a fire service point of view, we have an engine fire or something like that. We have a few flaps and so on and so forth that we can open. I mean, if it's not fully raging and the fire isn't, we can always put a CO2 in the oil cooler healer. This is just on flaps that you lift up like this, like you can see. Whack a CO2 in here as long as the engine's not on, and then you'll get your 20 or 20 to 30%. Another thing to note with the Cirrus as well is you also have these intakes here. So if we were to have a smoke inside the cockpit, or a cockpit fire with the pilot having got out, or it was just an aircraft that was down at the Aero Club with nobody in it, these vents go all the way to the inside for pilot cooling, okay? We could, if we wanted to, put a dry powder or a CO2 all the way into here, and we could put a fire out on the inside whilst starving the cockpit of oxygen, okay? We also have the intakes here, which goes straight into the engine. I mean, you've got the alternator here that goes straight into the engine. Sometimes you'll have a radiator here. You can put a CO2 straight into the back here, okay? Tricycle undercarriage, which means 2 mains and 1 nose. Something to note from the general aviation tow bar point of view. So this is what clamps onto the general aviation tow bar to allow us to tow from the nose. If we had a nose wheel failure, you can undo these screws here. The front comes off, and then you undo these 4 here, and the back comes off, which means you get access to the nose wheel straight away, okay? Likewise at the back, you have to undo all of these nuts, these 2 here, and then you'll get the whole spat off here, okay? Cirrus SR22 itself is known as a fly-by-wire aircraft. That means that all of the ailerons, the huge flaps here for slowing down, run off of a cable system. So cable, you can see here, the cable system goes all the way through into the back and to the control column at the front, okay? And then you've got your elevator, your rudder here. Note here that the elevator is just the rear of the tailplane. On the Cherokee 6, the whole of this tailplane here moves for the elevator, okay? So the main thing with the Cirrus SR22 that we need to know about is the BRS, or the CAPS system. So, Cirrus Aviation Parachute System, or to us in the fire service it's known as a ballistic recovery system. Effectively what happens is, we've got an area in the back here that says rocket for parachute deployment, okay? Please note, on newer aircraft that's pretty much all you will get. There's no warning triangles or anything like that. So at the very early stages you had the nice warning triangles. You don't have them anymore on some of the newer aircraft, because they don't look they look particularly great. It is worth noting that this still has a parachute system on board. You can see the caps just up here, okay? So this is where the parachute fires out of. So from a fire service point of view, we want to be completely away from this from a 45-degree angle. So if we need to get access to the pilot, we would always come from this way. We have to come from this way, but we keep ourselves low as much as possible until we can isolate it, okay? Isolating the cap system. Baggage door. We open the baggage door via the push, and the igniter is pretty much the same as a Pringles packet in the back here. You have a black cable that goes into the igniter. We need to cut that igniter via the Cirrus cable cutters that we have on the aircraft, on our appliances in the inventories, okay? If you can't have access to this baggage door, because it can be a key, then we'd have to go through the actual cockpit itself, okay? These back seats fold down. Sometimes there's a bit of vinyl behind, that's just on Velcro, and you pull that apart, okay? Or pull that away and you'll get access to the igniter. Also, sometimes the igniter will be behind this black bit here, which is also a bit of Velcro. You can pull that, but you will see where the wire will go, and then you can locate where the igniter is when you cut that, okay? That is pretty much the Cirrus SR22. I'm now going to take you inside, which is what a lot of you probably haven't done, okay? Pitot head here, obviously for all our instruments. We need that cover taken off to allow us to get all our instrument readings, or else we have what happened a couple of years ago with the aircraft spinning out onto the north side of the aircraft, because he didn't, north side of the runway, he didn't take this off, therefore he didn't get his instruments, so he took off sooner than what he was, stalled, and then rolled off, or span off onto the grass, okay? Something to note about the doors of the Cirrus: they are what's classed as Lambo doors. So if this plane was to be inverted, we wouldn't be able to open the doors, so we'd potentially have to cut them at the hinges, okay? Right. Inside the cockpit itself, okay? Looks really, really complicated. The actual mechanical side of the Cirrus is not complicated at all, i.e. starting the engine and isolating the engine, which is what I'm here for today, okay? You have a few instruments and levers that I need to tell you about. One of them being the parking brake here. So this will turn the parking brake on, which basically puts the brakes on. Something to know. Also, this needs to be off when we're towing, but it's just worth noting with the pilot, or if we're isolating it, or if we're on board with an incapacitated pilot, it's worth putting the parking brake on, which you would pull it and then it would turn one way or the other, okay? Cap system above here, I'll go through that in a little bit, but that's behind that cover. We'd pull that cover away, or remove the cover, and then pull the cap system. But what I wanted to show you straight off is the aircraft itself, okay? All of the engine buttons are here, okay? Worth noting that the battery is not red. So to isolate the battery in this, we'd have to know that the battery is, although it will say down here, sometimes, well, more often than not on the older aircraft, they're red, so it's worth noting that the batteries aren't red itself, okay? So I've just turned the batteries on here, the alternators to charge the batteries, and the avionics, which is for the instruments here, okay? Now, it is really straightforward to start an aircraft, a light aircraft, okay? All you need is fuel, so we're giving it fuel, okay? We then need to adjust the right mixture. We're trying to start the engine, so it's a little bit like putting the choke on. So we're giving it as much fuel and air mixture as possible, and then it is literally a case of starting the engine with the key, okay? Now this is electronic ignition, okay, which means the benefit to this aircraft is that when we go to turn the key again, it will turn off, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a little while, okay? The battery, however, is worth noting that on all aircraft you can isolate the battery and turn the battery off, but the engine doesn't turn off, okay? The battery, once the engine is running, is no longer needed, okay? It's a little bit like the GPU, okay? It is needed to power this, so the systems will eventually run out of battery because it's not turning on. But do not go to the battery straight away to isolate an aircraft, okay? One thing with the Cirrus is because the magnetos, which are the electrical charges that are on the engine, which allow the engine to run without the battery, because they are on the key, we can go to turn this and it will, into the off position, it will turn the aircraft off straight away, okay? However, some aircraft have the magnetos on switches. If the magnetos were on a switch here, we could turn this key all the way to off and the engine would still be running, okay? And in some aircraft, you can even turn it off all the way, even though the magnetos are on here, and it will turn, the engine won't turn off, okay? So it's worth noting that. If I'm ever going to isolate an aircraft, I'll always go the best way of doing it, which is starving it of fuel. Now, because this is an electronic injection, again, you can go all the way and turn the fuel selector all the way to off, and the engine will turn off, okay? In some older aircraft, PA-28s, Piper Cherokees, you can turn the fuel selector off, okay, and the aircraft will continue to run until the fuel is used up in the engine, okay, so you can get a good minute out of it, and then the engine will run off. Not good for the fire service if we want to isolate it straight away, okay? So I'm just going to turn this all the way back on. The one thing that I would like to say to you is in all aircraft, avgas ridden aircraft, not necessarily turboprops, they run slightly different, we have this mixture lever. It is always red, okay? If you turn this mixture all the way off or lean it all the way out, you will always turn the engine. In a pilot's checklist, to turn off an engine, you always turn an aircraft off via the mixture, okay? So to isolate an aircraft, the best thing that you can do from an engine side of things is to turn the mixture all the way off, which will cut all fuel to the engine, okay? Then what we would do is go along and turn off the batteries, okay? And as you can see now, because the magnetos are not running, because the engine is turned off, the battery will turn all of this on. What the magnetos do, and the alternator, as the engine is running, the propeller produces charge, which means effectively the propeller is producing its own electricity to allow the engine to keep running. So therefore, if there was a battery issue, although it would come up as a warning that the battery's been turned off, you wouldn't lose all your systems on board, okay? Last but not least, we have the cap system here, okay? So, the cap system, we have an isolated pin here. The pin has been taken out, so it's not in this, okay? But here is the pin, this is where the pin will go. You can also see the wire here, the black wire, which is what we would use the Cirrus cable cutters for. You can cut here as well if you'd like to, but you'd also put the pin in to isolate it here, especially if we're taking an incapacitated pilot out, okay? You don't want to be anywhere near this, so pin it if you can. The pins are normally located somewhere around the cockpit area or up here. They'll just be pinned, which you can pull out and pin it, okay? Now, a Cirrus aircraft, so 182 just going past there, Cirrus aircraft itself, if it came into difficulty, 2 to 3 pounds of pressure I think it is, you'd then pull this handle and then the parachute system will fire out at the back, okay? So if we pull this out, effectively what's happened is, a little bit unrealistic, this is a game, but the parachute has been deployed, okay? And this is exactly where it would come out, okay? Which is why we need to be away from 45 degree at all times, okay? Because this is where the parachute fires from. You can see the rocket on the inside, where the rocket fires out, okay? And then the parachute comes out of here, and then we'll lower the aircraft under its own steam. Remember that the pilot with the parachute, the pilot will come down, or the aircraft will come down in any way that it's supposed to. It's not controlled by the pilot at all, okay? So it will land on top of buildings, it will land into a house, it can land on an aircraft, it will land in the water, so we need to just be mindful of that, okay? Hopefully this has been helpful. You're now going to go on to the tabletop, which involves obviously a Cirrus aircraft, and hopefully you will then be able to have a bit more information, so it'll make the tabletop a little bit more interesting, and you can put put as much information into the tabletop as possible. Hopefully this has been helpful. If it has, I can do some more aircraft, and at least it allows you to get some information on an aircraft without us having to go down as pilots and go through all the hassle of that way. Okay, right. We'll then go back over onto the presentation now and begin the tabletop. See you in a bit.